Good morning, Dawg Nation. I am Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. We are fully loaded here on a Wednesday. The former Georgia quarterback, Jake Fromm, joins us before we're done. A lot of stuff with Jake about kind of what's next for Carson Beck, the national conversation happening around Carson. I think you'll like a lot of this. Mike Griffith coming by here today there as well. There is someone out there who has said something pretty weird about the pecking order here in the SEC to begin the upcoming season. At least I think it's a little bit weird. We'll tell you more about that. Brian Kelly, will put him in a spotlight because he is not too happy about the way that some transfer portal players kind of received the pitch from LSU to come join up here for this season. We'll kind of mock him for that. And to kick things off, it's always a fun topic for Georgia fans. It's the situation involving Georgia's running backs. After all, Georgia fans believe their program to be, I would say with good reason, RBU. Well, there is a lot of excitement about the fact that RBU could be back in fashion for Georgia here this year. Not sure it ever went out of style, but maybe some really good stuff from Trevor Etienne, Roderick Robinson. We'll tell you what's out there on that today. I believe you're going to like it. And without further ado, we'll get ready to do it. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Breda Pest Management, the official pest control of UGA Athletics.
Presented by DawgNation.com, this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I've seen a couple fun things as of late involving a couple of Georgia running backs, and I wanted to highlight some of this here right now for a couple of minutes, leading into maybe a little bit of a wish list from what I'd like to see from this position here this season. Let me start with Trevor Etienne. Obviously, Etienne comes over to Georgia from Florida. That's a pretty big deal in its own right. You always love taking something from the lousy, stinking Gators. In recent years, they've become pretty easy to take from, and Georgia never really gets tired of doing that. And the sort of stealing away of Etienne off the Gators roster is, I would think, one of the more sizable moves thus far in the SEC's offseason, and we think that Etienne is set up for pretty good success at Georgia here this year. In fact, we are not the only ones who feel that way. You may have seen the other day, and this is a few days old by now. We just haven't had time to get to it. The other day when ESPN was looking at its way too early top 25 and the most impactful newcomers on each of those teams, it was Trevor Etienne from Georgia who got the mention here. I want to show you a couple of things here that ESPN said about Etienne, and there's one thing in particular that I believe is pretty important for what Etienne's eventual value is going to be for Georgia. The writer here says that Georgia's recipe for success under Kirby Smart has been a strong run game with a stout defense. The Bulldogs lost Dejon Edwards and Kendall Milton, their top rushers respectively from a year ago. Etienne, the number 16 running back in the 2022 ESPN 300, as if we care about ESPN's recruiting rankings, was a very productive back the past 2 years running behind. Now, this is the important part. An average offensive line at Florida. He produced back-to-back seasons over 700 yards and scored 14 total touchdowns for the lousy, stinking Gators. They didn't put the lousy, stinking part, but we'll add that for them. ESPN goes on to say, Etienne has great feet, lateral quickness to pick and slide through traffic, and can separate from defenders shifting gears in the open field. Kind of goes on to give a little bit more scouting report there. But I think the ESPN writer here is absolutely right when you say, if you want to kind of bet the over on some season stat lines for Trevor Etienne, one of the best reasons you think that Etienne could be set up for more success at Georgia than he was at Florida, even though his numbers weren't necessarily bad at Florida, is we believe that the Georgia offensive line sets up to be much better than what Florida's offensive line has been. You've heard us even say this week. We think there's a chance the Georgia offensive line is the best offensive line in the country. And so, therefore, if a guy like Etienne was putting up decent numbers behind a Florida offensive line that left a lot to be desired, how much more could he potentially do at Georgia? We think perhaps quite a bit more. The thing, though, that the ESPN writer there, I would say, kind of got wrong is the overall narrative of what Georgia has been under Kirby Smart. We're going to do more of this here in just a couple of minutes, but just the general idea of, at Georgia, it's stout defense and good hard-nosed running. Well, to a certain extent, that's true. And, in the early days of Kirby Smart, when Georgia was essentially leading the SEC in rushing like 2017, 2018, I would say that's definitely true. But in recent years, the fact of the matter is that Georgia has actually evolved to be a team that throws it better than it runs it, a little more frequently, a little more successfully. That Georgia is probably in the what we think of as kind of the national championship era here, 2021, 2022, and a team that could have won the national championship 2023, that Georgia's passing part of its offense has probably been a little bit more successful than the rushing offense has been. So, and we'll give you some more numbers on this in a moment, but to kind of sort of further this point for now, it's not as if Georgia's rushing attack is bad. Last year, they led the nation in rushing touchdowns. That's pretty clearly, not anything too bad there. But it has been somewhat overshadowed by a guy in Stetson Bennett who became a Heisman finalist and a quarterback in Carson Beck who, returns with a chance to be a first-round draft pick. That I think with people who are watching Georgia football closely, apparently this ESPN writer isn't quite as, watching it quite as close as we are. We would say that, the overall recipe for Georgia the last couple of years has been a lot more about the passing attack than it used to be. And so, therefore, we've seen a little bit of a statistical downgrade in some respects for the Georgia offense, at least compared to where it was in 2017, 2018. That is why the presence of a guy like Trevor Etienne is so exciting, because you kind of wonder, well, a back with this particular skill set, does he unlock a level of achievement for the Georgia rushing game that we kind of haven't seen in a couple of years? And the answer to that question might end up being yes, because there's no doubt that the same sort of dynamic skill set that many of us feel like we've noticed with Trevor Etienne, a coach like Kirby Smart seems like he's kind of noticed those things there as well. And he talked about that after G-Day. Let's give you a reminder going back to April, what Kirby Smart said about the relatively new Georgia running back freshly arrived from Florida. This is Kirby Smart on Trevor Etienne.
He's a good back. He's explosive. He's quick in and out of the hole. He's different than what we've had. I think Swift analogy's good. Cook's analogy's good. He's really taken a lot of personal pride in working on his protection, and he had a nice pickup today. He's learning the offense. I mean, look, the guy's he's been a good SEC player for 2 years. It's not like he's a freshman. He's a really good player. He's a really good kid, and I've been proud of the way he's handled everything since his deal.
Explosive and quick in the mold of a James Cook or a DeAndre Swift. I think most Georgia fans are going to really like that a lot. Now, obviously, Kirby Smart at the end there reflects on the fact that Etienne did have an arrest taking place in spring practice for, I guess, suspicion of DUI, you'll call it. That's clearly something you don't want to happen. Etienne himself, I'm sure regrets all that there as well. But overall, as not good as that was, we don't think it changed the overall outlook for Trevor Etienne here this season. Important to, I guess, kind of mention that Etienne is set up for a lot of success, we think, this year. And it's that explosiveness and that quickness that probably sets him up to do that in the mold of some guys who've had a lot of success there at Georgia. But that is not the only Georgia running back for whom that might be true. I think one of the really fun stories for Georgia this offseason, and maybe this is kind of catching me off guard more so than it's catching you off guard, and this is not in any way to be disrespectful, but there was just a lot more in the way of praise for Roderick Robinson even before spring practice started than I expected there to be. Not because I don't think that Robinson's a really good player. I just did not perhaps realize that his growth was accelerating at the rate that it seems like it might be. And this is both true on the field. We saw him look pretty good at G-Day. I would say it's true in the weight room there too, and I'm going to show you this on the screen. Now, total confession here for a moment. It is very hard to talk about a guy with his shirt off in a way that doesn't sound creepy, like you're evaluating a shirtless pig here. There's a certain weirdness associated with that, so I'm going to try to very, very carefully do this here for a moment. If you're listening radio podcast, I got to describe it to you. Video, I think the image speaks for itself here. So Robinson on the X platform the other day put out a caption that said no time off and showed a picture of him doing a deadlift. And I got to tell you, Robinson is in what looks to me to be pristine physical condition. I mean, really rocked out. I did not quite realize that's what he was working with, and that's what he was bringing to the table. My assumption here is, and if you're on video, you're seeing the picture, radio podcast, I'm in the position, as delicate as it is, of trying to describe this to you. I'm guessing that would make a man very difficult to tackle. That level of physique, that level of muscular structure, I'm guessing that would make you pretty difficult to tackle here. And that's generally speaking what we heard about Robinson during the spring, is that wrapping arms around him and trying to bring him down was not an easy thing to do. And we got plenty of that on G-Day there as well. So when you're hearing all the chatter about, well, Trevor Etienne is the quick back. He's got the explosiveness. He's in the kind of the mold of the James Cook. He's kind of in the mold of a DeAndre Swift. Well, the image that you're seeing there, if you're watching on video, would suggest that Roderick Robinson is a freight train, and he may be running somebody over. In fact, we saw him actually, doing some of that there on G-Day. And, of course, it's the oldest cliche in the book. I totally understand that. But the notion of the thunder and the lightning, that as tired of a comparison as that is, or a metaphor, or simile, or whatever it is that is, that really may be what the Georgia running back room looks like here this year, that Robinson, who's apparently working out that hard, is doing it for a purpose, and the purpose is to be as good as he possibly can be this fall. And just the same way that Kirby Smart had some words of praise for Trevor Etienne after G-Day, he had some strong things to say about Roderick Robinson there as well, which no doubt has Georgia fans excited right now. This, again, Kirby Smart, this time on Roderick Robinson.
He keeps getting better. He's got toughness. I enjoy coaching Rod. He takes coaching well. A big physical guy that you want to get more out of him, and he's given us what he's got. He's got to continue to work on his pass protection. He's become a better route runner. I'm pleased with where Rod is, and he needs to be even better for us next year.
So he's obviously challenging Robinson. He mentions pass protection for both his running backs. That's clearly going to be important. But once again, if you're a Georgia fan and you're kind of ambitious about what Rob could do this year, kind of ambitious about what you think that Etienne could do this year, it seems like you've got some evidence to back up the point, and ESPN seems to be touting that, and social media photos seem to be kind of sort of, I guess, supporting some of that too. So it kind of leads me to ask the question of, okay, well, what would be then an expectation for the Georgia running back room? For these two guys and, guys like Branson Robinson coming back from injury, Nate Frazier arriving in. And by the way, Nate Frazier, my understanding is going to be on Before the Hedges, presented by Kroger with Jeff Sintel tonight. That's a really big deal for a guy that we think is going to play this year for Georgia. He's not here yet, but he's about to be. And when he gets here, we think he has a chance to step in and be a part of the Georgia offense. So for the Georgia running back room overall, what could this look like? As I mentioned a moment ago, and I'd like to give you these little statistical things every now and then, try to keep them as simple as I can. As I mentioned before, that when you look at Kirby Smart's sort of rise to power at Georgia, it was really good defense and the best rushing offense, at least for Power 5 teams, in all of college football. You had, and we're going to talk to Jake Fromm more about this a little bit later on, about the value of having running backs like this. But you had like Sony Michel and Nick Chubb teaming up for about 2,500 yards. And in 2018, DeAndre Swift and Elijah Holyfield, they were somewhere kind of around the same sort of thing. These were, very successful rushing attacks. And I think most of us thought that when Georgia finally broke through and won the national championship, it'd be with a style a little bit like what, Kirby Smart was showing in those early days. But the truth is statistically, the first national championship under Kirby Smart actually looked a good bit different than that. Georgia was only sixth in the SEC in 2021 in rushing yards per game, a far cry from what it once was. Not necessarily bad. And in the last 3 years, when you look at like yards per carry or things like that, Georgia's always like top 2, top 3 in the SEC. But at least in the first year of the championship era there in 2021, their kind of total rushing yards per game compared to the rest of the SEC was not quite what it once was. I'd say the last couple of years since then, Georgia has sort of started to take some steps back in the direction of being, one of the SEC's most dominant rushing attacks. And year after year, as I said before, measured by like yards per carry, things like that, one of the most sound and most successful rushing attacks in the league. But that doesn't mean that you couldn't wish for Georgia this year a couple of things that you perhaps, haven't seen a ton of in the past. And I was looking at this. The sort of explosive run stuff, that may be an area where if Etienne is as good as it sounds like he could be, and if Roderick Robinson is as good as it sounds like he could be, that could be an area where there's some improvement in store here. Over the course of the last 3 years in the SEC, there have only been 2 SEC teams to have a season in which they had more than 100, carries of 10 or more yards. Ole Miss did that twice. Arkansas did that one of these years here too. Georgia's kind of in that sort of 90-plus, 10-plus yard carry, range the last few seasons. Could they get 100 carries this year of 10 or more yards? That'd be a pretty ambitious goal, but at the same time, not unachievable based on the fact that a couple of SEC teams have done it. Same thing when it comes to running plays of 20 or more yards. There have been 2 teams over the course of the last 3 years to have 30 rushing plays of 20 or more yards. One of those is Ole Miss. They have a very prolific rushing attack with Lane Kiffin as coach. Auburn was able to do that in 2022 there as well. Could Georgia, who is somewhere in that 20-something carries of 20 or more yards the last 3 years, could they have a season this year in which they get 30 carries of 20 or more yards? Perhaps that's the case. Once again, a pretty ambitious goal, but at the same time, not necessarily impossible. The point here is, what would the Georgia offense look like that includes Carson Beck, includes all those dynamic passing weapons, if you also added some more explosive runs into the mix? Not exactly sure, but it sure would be a lot of fun to find out. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Breda Pest Management. We're happy to have you with us no matter how you get to us today. Video across all platforms, 10 a.m., radio, Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. Fun get together with my friends on 960 The Ref this morning. I join them each and every Wednesday. I always enjoy that. Radio, as I said there, podcast, Apple, Spotify, posting the show at the world-famous DawgNation.com. Just happy to have you checking us out however you choose to get to us. And so thankful to our friends at Breda Pest Management who make it all possible there as well. The official pest control provider of UGA Athletics. So if you're sitting in Sanford Stadium this year and you're watching Trevor Etienne or Roderick Robinson running down the sideline, long rushing plays, exciting rushing attack here this year, looking like RBU, just keep in mind the stadium that you're sitting in while you're doing that is protected from termites and bugs and critters and everything else by our friends at Breda Pest Management. And the same company that's been recognized as the official pest control provider of UGA Athletics can be your official pest control provider there as well. And when you make the switch to Breda, you get more than prestige, you get more than bragging rights. You're going to get more money back in your pocket just for making that decision. That is what Breda Pest Management is all about. They've been in business since 1975. They've got 125 employees. I'm driving all the time, like literally all across the state, it seems like, on a weekly basis. And I can't go anywhere without seeing one of these Breda Pest Management trucks out there doing the same kind of stuff, taking care of folks and doing things for people. That is what they are all about. So make the switch, put more money back in your pocket for doing so. Trust them for your termite protection, which you need. In Georgia, termites are just a fact of life. You need that termite protection. Make the switch to Breda Pest Management for your termite protection. Or, bugs. It seems like there's just bugs everywhere right now. Flying squirrels, whatever else. Breda Pest Management got you on all that. So find them online, bredapest.com. B-R-E-D-A, bredapest.com. That's B-R-E-D-A, bredapest.com. All right, 2 great guests for us coming up. As I mentioned before, Jake Fromm going to be with us before we're done. One of the things we will get into with Jake, this is an interview we recorded yesterday, one of the things we will get into is what we were just saying about what the Georgia rushing attack sort of used to be and how valuable it is if you've got 2 backs, the way in which an Etienne and a Roderick Robinson could perhaps be for Georgia here this year. Jake Fromm will give you some good stuff coming up on that. Mike Griffith in just a couple of minutes, too. There is plenty to talk about with Mike, and as perhaps a setup for that, I want to go around the doghouse here today, and one of the things we've been discussing is the sort of prevailing chatter out there right now. We are officially in talking season. Now, we like to talk, so talking season is kind of fun for us. But it's also kind of interesting to watch the way in which some people try to maybe kind of twist themselves into a knot to come up with the most interesting possible opinion as they're ranking their lists and their power ratings and things like that. Maybe an example of this coming from CBS Sports. Now, caveat on this again. As we've been saying this week, as we've compared Georgia and Ohio State, last year we sort of mocked people who talked up Michigan. As painful as it is to admit this, they turned out to be right. We kind of gave Kirk Herbstreit a hard time because he was sort of re-racking the same old tired Alabama opinion that he had run out the year before. And at least in comparison to us, he was more right than wrong. So we want to be careful about this, but we're also going to notice stuff when it gets said there as well. I want to show you this from Will Backus, CBSSports.com. Now, what he has done is offer, the headline says, SEC post-spring power rankings, Georgia fends off Texas for the number 1 spot. So what it says here is that Georgia is number 1 in the SEC power rankings and Texas is number 2. Now, for the most part, we're pretty big believers in Texas here this year. Their season win total, if you care about gambling, is about 10.5. They've got Quinn Ewers coming back. Isaiah Bond's a big transfer portal addition. And Steve Sarkisian, I think, accomplished something very real and genuine last year in winning the Big 12 in that team's final year in that conference and getting to the college football playoff. Texas arrives into the SEC with a good bit of steam. I don't think you can deny that at all. And with a guy like Arch Manning waiting in the wings, they may have a very bright future even beyond just this year. So we're not necessarily down on Texas. But I do disagree with what Will Backus says here in this comparison. When he kind of mentions Georgia as his SEC power ranking number 1, he writes, to be honest, Georgia and Texas were in a heated race for the number 1 spot. Backus writes, the Bulldogs get the edge given Kirby Smart's SEC track record and the fact that Carson Beck looks like the league's best starting quarterback, on and on he goes. So, as I said before, last year we kind of called out people who picked against Georgia. They turned out to be right, so we're going to try not to be too blowhardy about this. But if you want to kind of sort of follow the basic rules of hot takes and the basic rules of preseason opinions and things like that, I think you got to really stretch things to say that Georgia and Texas are in a dead heat with each other and that somehow Texas is on par with Georgia. Now, Texas is going to have its chance to prove things, and if it beats Georgia head-to-head, well, that obviously changes the scenario, and right now Georgia's only a slight favorite in Austin, so obviously there is some thought that Texas could beat Georgia. If you just want to be honest about it, we don't necessarily think that's going to happen, but that is what some people seem to think, so, or at least they expect the game to be close, so Texas will have its chance to prove what it is. But the idea that Texas under Steve Sarkisian has already proven enough to say, oh, it's right there equal with Georgia in a sort of a heated race to be the top team in the SEC, I would say that's unfair to Georgia based on what Georgia's accomplished. Georgia has won, 29 straight games, a couple of national championships, big win after big win after big win. By comparison, Texas won the Big 12. And I don't have to tell you this, you already know, winning the Big 12 doesn't mean anything to an SEC fan. You're supposed to win the Big 12. It's kind of a big deal for Texas because they had not done it prior to 2009. That's more of a Longhorn problem than it is a statement about just how good Texas became last year. Texas did win at Alabama, and that is a significant accomplishment. That's a real thing. But that is kind of the only big win that Texas got all year along the way to being in the college football playoff. They were in the CFP, but they lost that game to Washington, so anybody could have done that. The win at Alabama is what ultimately propelled them there, but that one big win, as big as it was, I don't know that compares with the sort of collection of big wins that Georgia's been earning over the course of these last 3 seasons. So it's not my point here to tell you that Georgia's going to definitely be better than Texas here this season. That's what playing the games is all about. We'll all find that out together. This notion that to begin the year, they're on the same footing, equal ground here as 2 teams sort of co-favorites in the SEC, I think that's disrespectful to the resume that Georgia's earned over the course of the last couple of seasons, and perhaps a little bit wishful thinking, inflating what the Longhorns are on the heels of winning a conference in the Big 12 that's far different than the one they're about to enter. And that is Around the Doghouse here today on DawgNation Daily. And before we bring on Mike Griffith, let me also give a shout out to our friends at Dr. Pepper, because while, I don't love the Texas Longhorns, I do love the fact that one of the great things to ever come out of the state of Texas is Dr. Pepper. And we love Dr. Pepper here right now. And as we head towards the summer, Dr. Pepper has got some really, really fun stuff in store for you. And I think you're going to love this as sort of the perfect flavor for summer. It's the Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut and the Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut Zero Sugar. It's going to be so much fun. And, so many people on the cruise ship were, when we were on our DawgNation cruise, we were kind of talking about this. We had some, great swag to give away from Dr. Pepper, and everybody on board was excited about Dr. Pepper Creamy Coconut because it's kind of like that sort of tropical type vibe, perfect for being at the pool or the beach or something like that. And when Dr. Pepper puts one of these specialty flavors out, it always generates a lot of buzz, a lot of rave reviews. And so I know people are going to love that. And as you're kind of, I guess, enjoying your typical flavor of Dr. Pepper, for me, it's Diet Dr. Pepper Zero Sugar. Go ahead and grab yourself a 6-pack of the Creamy Coconut. I think that seems like a pretty good way to try things here this summer. So as you're shopping at your local Kroger or wherever you're going, enjoy yourself some Dr. Pepper. And, of course, it's great to have them as a part of DawgNation Daily each and every week there as well. It's great to have all of you here, too, and I hope you'll stick around in a few minutes. the great former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm. A lot for him to say today. We'll get into that as it relates to Carson Beck and everything else going on with Georgia. But for now, exactly what is the talking season chatter around Georgia? Mike Griffith obviously follows this stuff closely, so let's do that with him right now here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Let me bring in Mike Griffith here on this. Mike, I know you like the talking season stuff. You and I are both pretty prolific talkers, so I guess this is the type of year that was made, for us. I've never been very good at throwing touchdown passes, and I'm not really quite so sure I could call a play, but I can talk, and so that's what this time of year is sort of made for here. So we've been kind of talking about what's being said about Georgia. We've done some of this last couple of days as it relates to Ohio State. And, there's clearly a reason for all that chatter because of how aggressive they've been during the offseason. A moment ago, we did this with Georgia and Texas. And I would say that I'm fairly pro-Texas. I get why their season win total is what it is. I think that they enter the SEC here this season a lot more like a real SEC power. They look more like one than I expected them to because they've gotten better on lines of scrimmage. They've obviously got quarterback figured out. Sarkisian, I think, has taken some big step forwards as a coach here. But in terms of being viewed as an equal to Georgia, I can't get there on the basis of one season and really one game. They won at Alabama, big deal, big win. But I don't know how many other wins for Texas this season sort of felt like that, where in the case of Georgia, it's been a lot of big wins over the course of the last 3 years. So how they finish, who knows? Power ratings to begin the year, I've got to put Georgia, relatively slightly ahead of, maybe even sizably ahead of Texas here right now. Where do you kind of come down in a conversation like that?
Yeah, the only thing I can think, Brandon, is that Georgia plays at Texas, and people are looking at that as an advantage for Texas, as I suppose it is. And I think you said Georgia's a slight favorite, and we'll definitely been working on a post on that already with the DraftKings odds that are out. But to me, that's probably where that comes from. And let's face it, Texas made the college football playoff. Arch Manning had a really impressive spring game. Quinn Ewers is a guy that is the co-Heisman favorite with Carson Beck. And Steve Sarkisian is very media friendly. Texas gets a lot of love. I'm not saying Georgia's disrespected, but I contend that Kirby Smart doesn't get his due, largely overshadowed by the whole Nick Saban phenomena, especially now that Nick's with ESPN. And, that's just the hand that you're dealt. It kind of reminds me a little bit. And for those old enough to remember, it never really felt like Nebraska and Tom Osborne got enough respect and credit when they were the most dominant program of the second half of the 1990s. And that's kind of what it feels like here. Like Kirby's kind of a Tom Osborne, he's not a guy that, beats his own chest or trumpets his own horn. He just wins and collects talent and puts guys in the NFL. Whereas Sarkisian, I think he's a little bit more of an intriguing figure with his background and some of the highs and lows that he's been through off the field. So I get why Texas is the sexy storyline. I mean, let's face it, Georgia has become the standard in college football. And, people, I don't want to say there's Georgia fatigue, but I don't think they're quite as spicy or sexy as some of these other new teams coming into the league. And Texas probably gets a little bit of a boost from that.
So let me flip the script and kind of play devil's advocate on this because I just sort of talked about, some skepticism about Texas in comparison to Georgia. But on the other side, I'll say this. The story that I see playing out with Texas right now kind of reminds me a little bit of a few years ago in kind of the early days of Dabo Swinney when there was this notion of Clemsoning and, Clemson's going to have a chance at a good season, but they're going to lose the sort of game that ruins that opportunity. And that's kind of what the knock on Clemson was. The Texas version of that has been the meme, the cliche of, Texas is back. This notion that they're always kind of, predicted for return to glory that never really happens. Mike, I think there's a pretty good chance that last year ended the whole Texas is back meme because I do sort of think Texas is kind of back. And I do think that Texas stands as Georgia's toughest game on paper here this season. And I believe I'd be saying that even if Nick Saban was still coaching in Alabama. I do think that Texas kind of knows what the SEC requires from them, and they've got some replacements they need to make along their defensive line, but they were good on the defensive line a year ago, something they had not been in years prior to that. I think they were better along the offensive line too. So guys like A.D. Mitchell or Quinn Ewers last year would have gotten the attention. Isaiah Bond's transfer in is going to get attention. Arch Manning waiting in the wings is going to get attention. But they've become a much better team on the lines of scrimmage. And with some new faces there this year, I'm assuming to a certain extent that's still kind of true. So while I don't agree with the idea that Texas being viewed in equal standing of Georgia coming into the season, I do think that Texas's stature as a program has greatly improved. Perhaps it's the motivation of knowing you're going to be in the SEC that's caused this to happen. But Texas looks like a real team to me right now. And for a long time, that really hasn't been the case.
Yeah, I think you're right. And it goes back to Steve Sarkisian realizing that he had to build this team differently to compete in the SEC and getting the size you're talking about at the line of scrimmage. And last year they were absolutely dominant on the defensive line. I don't think they're going to be able to maintain. We saw Georgia. There hasn't been a line like the 2021 or even 2022 line. I think Texas is going to fall off a little bit there. It looks like they did some work in the portal. Should have a very good offensive line. It's going to be tough to replace A.D. Mitchell. I just don't put Isaiah Bond in the same conversation with A.D. Mitchell. I thought A.D. did a lot for them. They had another receiver that was extremely fast on the other side. Again, I saw them in Tuscaloosa beat Alabama. Just a well-coached team. But I think you brought this up at the start of the segment, Brandon. If you look at what Texas did down the stretch last year, I don't know that they really were one of the four best teams. I understand why they got in the playoff. They beat Alabama and Alabama beat Georgia, so transitive properties. But in all reality, I don't think Texas was one of the four best teams last year in college football. I think they took advantage of a ill-prepared Alabama team that didn't know how to use their quarterback. I thought that was one of Nick Saban's worst coaching jobs at the start of last season. Their quarterback was benched, 3 games in, Brandon? So yeah. I felt like Texas was kind of the benefactor of a really poor Alabama start to the season. I'm not convinced that Texas, even though I know on paper it looks like the toughest game, for some reason, I don't think it will be. I just have a feeling that Georgia will be able to go to Austin and take care of business convincingly in that game. And I'm not sure why. It kind of strikes me as like last year's Ole Miss game. All we heard all year long, and myself included, was, oh my gosh, Ole Miss and Lane Kiffin and their offense. And Georgia just took care of business. And I've got that same vibe about this game. I just don't think Georgia gets beat as long as Carson Beck is healthy. And some of this is that I'm on a Carson Beck high right now, right? Like, I think Carson Beck made some plays in that G-Day game that changed the way I view him and his abilities. So because of Carson Beck, his command of the offense, I saw enough from the receivers, and I saw a lot from Etienne. I'm going to tell you, Etienne had a Marshall Faulk look to him when you look at what he did out of that backfield. I think this Georgia offense, Brandon, is going to be explosive and record-setting.
Well, let's transition to that a little bit because we were talking about the Georgia running backs before you joined us, and I know that kind of matches a little bit of what you kind of talked about in your own show on The Beat on Monday about some of those big offseason questions for Georgia here right now. One of yours did relate to running back. You mentioned Carson Beck there too. So I'm going to kind of set you up for that. We can do the offensive side of the ball here for a moment if you want to. Like, what do you think the big questions for Georgia on offense are right now?
Well, obviously Carson Beck being at his best, but asserting himself as a leader. I mean, Kirby's put it out there more than once. When Kirby says he's not an assertive guy by nature, he's throwing the bait out there for Carson Beck. He's challenging his quarterback. When he said at the end of the spring he wants to see Carson Beck improve in leadership, he's doubling down on it. I like Carson as a leader. For those who haven't talked to him, he's a really easygoing guy. He's a guy that says when something needs to be said, it'll be said. But I think Carson needs to sharpen those skills and needs to be the sort of catalyst that can raise the performance, right? Not just make sure everybody's dressed right dress, but motivate and inspire, something I think Jake Fromm did. I know Jake's going to be a guest on your show today. I thought Jake was really good at getting everyone around him better. And I think Carson has that in him. He's a very likable, easygoing guy. So that to me is number one, because these off-season workouts mean everything. He's got to inspire everybody to be there and then be at their best in these individual workouts that these players do on their own away from the coaching staff. Two is the go-to receiver. I know that Dom Lovett can catch the ball in his sleep and in the dark from Carson Beck, but we need to see if Dylan Bell and Colby can make these plays. And I was really impressed by the catch Ra Thomas made in that 2-minute drill. I mean, if all these guys come to fruition, Arian Smith, then that receiving core will be solid. Of course, we're counting on Oscar Delp and Lawson Lucky to, supplant the tight end production. Maybe not in a Brock Bowers sort of way, but transitioning into running back, I think Trevor Etienne is your new Brock Bowers. I think he's the guy that nobody can cover and nobody can stop. And then you dump it in the flats. He runs those little Texas angle routes, can do so many different things. But for Etienne to be at his best and be that special X weapon that I'm envisioning, we need Branson Robinson to be healthy. If Branson Robinson is healthy, that means he can shoulder enough carries that you've got a really strong rotation. We know Rod Robinson was a guy really impressed Kirby at 240 pounds. You're talking Branson Robinson, Roderick Robinson, and Etienne. And here comes Frazier, by the way. I had a little plug for Jeff Santel on his show tonight. You might want to check that out if you have interest in Nate Frazier. But the depth in that backfield, and listen, I don't want to dog last year's backfield because I thought Milton finished strong and I thought Dejon Edwards was a soldier. Neither one of those guys got drafted. If you're going to compare last year's backfield to the backfields that preceded them, I think, Brandon, you would have to say it wasn't one of the best. I think this backfield could be as good as the one that we've seen going back to DeAndre Swift days. I think we're approaching 2017. I'm not going to say it's as good as 2017 backfield. I'm not going to do that. 2020 backfield with Samir, Cook, Kenny, and Kendall. Could we be in that number 2 backfield? Maybe. Really, really bullish on the Georgia backfield if Branson Robinson is as healthy as I believe he is. Because I don't think they let Andrew Paul walk if Branson Robinson isn't truly 100% for the start of fall drills.
That's interesting because I guess I sort of still see that as a – and listen, I'm very high on Branson as a player, but I still sort of see that injury recovery as a pretty significant one, just to be completely honest with you. And so that's why, as you mentioned, I'm interested in hearing from Nate tonight because, I think that Frazier is going to have a chance of, of all the guys still yet to come, and that's Jurasek is the transfer. That's what? Small handful of signees from the 2024 class. I think the guys who are yet to be at Georgia who have the chance to make the biggest impact, I think that Frazier would be the top of my list on that right now.
Well, he is an impact player coming from Mater Dei. I mean, we know the level of competition they play out there. I mean, it's just a shade below small college football when you look at the amount of talent that comes out of that league. This guy's dynamic. He played for the best high school program in the country. You see him, he's able to catch the ball out of the backfield there on that wheel route. How impressive is that? Could he run some of the stuff Etienne runs? Could he provide some of the relief? I mean, typically when you have a guy like an Etienne, you want somebody else that can do the same things when he checks out. Santel very high on this guy. In fact, I think Jeff's comment to us this morning on our private call, which I guess won't be so private after I repeat his quote, is that we'll forget all about Andrew Paul when Nate Frazier's on campus. Very high praise, a guy that comes from a high-profile program. Look, he was signed to be a difference maker. He wasn't signed to come in and be the 4-string running back and get 38 carries and play special teams this year. This guy is a plug-and-play signee, to your point. He's got to learn the offense, though, Brandon. That's going to be important. The Carson Beck, with his ability to solve Rubik's Cube in a minute and read a defense in 10 seconds, he can only go as fast as the players around him. So when Nate Frazier's on the field, he needs to know the playbook. If Carson audibles out of that dive and Frazier's in a position to protect, he's got to know which side to go to, because one mistake can cost you your quarterback for a season in the SEC if that blitz isn't picked up.
Quick final one for you here, Mike, and I want to shout out our buddy Cody Chavins, who did a great job putting a really fun video package together, Charlie Condon. So my family and I, we were at the game on Sunday. We had some plans canceled. We were able to just sort of shoot over there and see that game. And being around Foley Field on Sunday, the sense that I get is the mood around Charlie Condon's really starting to change. It was 7th straight game with a home run. Georgia, just sweeps Vanderbilt out of the building. That I think that Condon is sort of starting to transcend a little bit of kind of a fun SEC baseball story. There's always going to be a big slugger in this league. Condon feels right now a little different than that for me, and it sort of feels like that he's now starting to be appreciated by more than just the hardcore UGA baseball fan. This is really fun. I don't know where it goes for Georgia on the field here this season, although I think they have a really good chance of hosting a regional. And where it ultimately ends up for Condon, I guess, is yet to be determined. But, boy, this is a blast to watch unfold right now, is it not?
Yeah, I'd use the word Bunyan-esque. This is a legend in the making, Brendan. This is the greatest Georgia baseball player in history. He's playing right before our eyes, and you saw him talking to Coach Wes Johnson. What an incredible job Wes has done in year one. 28 new players on this team. 28 of them, okay? 18 new players coming in along with 10 freshmen. So this is a rebuilt Georgia baseball roster. Charlie and Corey Collins, two of the guys that stuck around. I think if you watch Charlie Condon play, it's one thing. To talk to him is another. He's got a poise and a confidence about him. You mentioned the opportunity to host a regional. And Charlie says, look, we've known we're a contender all year long. Other people are figuring that out now. So if you're wondering what needs to happen, Georgia plays at South Carolina in a 3-game series this weekend, and then they play host to Florida the following week. If they can win 3 of those 6 games, they're a slam dunk to host a regional, Brandon, and maybe even be one of the top 8 because they have a national RPI of number 5. Georgia baseball has quietly become one of the hottest stories in the country. They have a 5-game win streak. That's the longest of any team in the league as they head off to South Carolina. And there's Charlie right in the middle of it. Yes, he's a prolific home run hitter, 33 home runs in 47 games. It's very impressive. But did you know he also leads the nation in batting average and slugging percentage? Oh, and by the way, he plays 5 positions in the field. So what we're seeing is historic. What we're seeing is the greatest Georgia baseball player in history, likely the number 1 overall draft pick in the Major League Baseball draft is what he's projected to be. And, seeing Cody's videos here play out on DawgNation Daily, you talk about arriving. I don't know if we've talked about Georgia baseball this long to this extent, but if Bay A is on board, then I would say all the Georgia fans are on board.
No, it's a lot of fun here right now, Mike. We appreciate you discussing it with us. Thanks so much for your time. We'll look forward to reading a whole lot more from you at DawgNation.com. And, of course, have you back here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management again very soon as well.
All right. Thanks, Brandon. Have a good one.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
Later on this week, we may show you the full package that Cody put together. You don't have to wait on us, though. You can go to the DawgNation YouTube page and see that for yourself, because I thought it was really good. And it's the kind of thing that I think just looks good to have on our YouTube page there, so I encourage you to see that. If you go to DawgNation.com, you can also check that out as well. And as you're checking that out, I hope you'll also be ready to check out Utopia of the Seas. That's the brand new Royal Caribbean cruise ship as we're cruising around the SEC here, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And it's one of those things. I always have a little scheme going to try to see if I can figure out a way to, whether it be to, get permission to leave the show for a couple of days or get, the rubber stamp from the home front or whatever else to, get us on board and get us on one of these brand new Royal Caribbean cruise ships. Because I really feel like it's my duty, it's my job to come back and tell you all about it, because that's kind of what I do, right? I'm sort of the forerunner on this and come back and say, hey, you guys are going to love this brand new Royal Caribbean cruise ship. Well, I haven't been on Utopia of the Seas yet, but I have been investigating everything about it, and I do believe we're all going to love Utopia of the Seas when it sets sail beginning in July. So many cool new concepts, including the pesky parrot. That's going to be a really fun new kind of tropical themed bar right there in the Royal Promenade area. Also, I love the stuff they're doing with the pool decks here and kind of the expansion of the lime and coconut, which is sort of the fun sort of poolside, bar. There's obviously no shortage of bars and lounges and live music to go along with that on so many of these Royal Caribbean cruise ships. And Utopia of the Seas is going to be so much fun. It's the brand new Oasis class ship, and it's going to be sailing out of Port Canaveral really exclusively for those 3 and those 4-night sailings. And that means for folks who like the short cruise, who maybe that works their schedule better, but they want the best that Royal Caribbean has to offer, it's going to be a perfect marriage here, especially if it's your first time taking a cruise. Your first experience can be on a shorter cruise on a brand new cruise ship. Who would not want to do that? So please contact Jessica Slater. She can help you with everything you need. You ever call 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her at jslater@dreamvacations.com. Also, don't forget, we got Jake Fromm here coming up in just a moment. Prior to that, though, as we go cruise around the SEC courtesy of Royal Caribbean, if you don't mind, I want to bring the music down here a little bit because there's something I want to make sure that you hear. Really interesting interview here this week that's gotten a lot of attention from LSU coach Brian Kelly with Jacques, I think it's Doucet. Is that how you say his name? Jacques Doucet. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I've seen his name in print for years. I guess I'm not sure the pronunciation. Perhaps I butchered that. But longtime guy covering LSU speaking with Brian Kelly. Now, what's interesting here, and this is the context, is that Kelly during LSU spring practice, in a way that not all coaches always do, made it very, we've spoken about this during the space a couple times before, made it very clear their number one goal in the transfer portal, and essentially their only goal of the offseason, was to bring in some defensive linemen. Well, guess what? That didn't work, at least in the high-profile case, Dominic Williams. You may have seen the video of that. They brought Williams in for the visit, a lot of fanfare, a little bit like Amarius Mims going to Florida State a couple of years ago. A lot of fanfare, and yet Williams ultimately chose to go to Oklahoma over LSU. So Kelly put a big statement out there about what they planned on doing, and thus far it's not really working. And Kelly was asked, very appropriate question, what's going on with all this here right now? And Brian Kelly seems to be sort of excuse-making, kind of complaining a little bit about NIL. I think this is kind of interesting. This is Brian Kelly with Jacques Doucet, a reporter who covers LSU. Take a look at this.
D-line, interior D lineman, where are you right now with that?
Well, I think I made it pretty clear in a number of the press conferences that I had that we were in the market in recruiting in the transfer portal looking for defensive linemen. It hasn't fared very well, quite frankly, because, we're selling something a little bit differently, and that is we want to recruit. We want to engage, build relationships. We want to develop, retain, and have success. We're not in the market of buying players, and unfortunately, right now, that's what some guys are looking for. They want to be bought. And look, I understand NIL is part of this, and we have an incredible collective. We have very, very generous opportunities around the greater Baton Rouge area for NIL opportunities. So they are here, but we're not going to go out and buy players. That's not what this is about. This was never about that. We will develop you. We will get you ready for the next step, as we did with Jaden Daniels, as we did with Malik Neighbors, as we did with Brian Thomas. We developed 3 defensive linemen that all got drafted this year, and we'll do that again. But if you're just looking to get paid, you're looking in the wrong place. If you like all the things that we do here in developing our players, bringing you into a championship program, playing in front of the best fan base in America, playing for championships, and having an opportunity for NIL, you should be a Tiger. But if you just want to get paid, this is not the place for you.
Boy, there is a lot to say about this. I think first and foremost, Brian Kelly is not a good communicator. I do believe for the most part Kelly's a good coach. I think so. But he is not a good communicator. He's just not. And I think part of what you kind of see from him in this situation is he comes across, I think, more harshly than he'd like to. He comes across more critical of the NIL structure than he probably as a coach should be doing, just on the simple basis of, and we're getting some natural sound coming from that video that we're hearing there, that in a situation like that, he's just not a very good communicator. Now, I don't want to jump on him too bad about that, just simply because what he does during spring practice of saying, we want these defensive linemen, this is why coaches sometimes don't say anything and they don't tell the truth and they kind of avoid interesting comments because the stuff they say can be held against them later on. And in the case of Brian Kelly, you don't want to jump on him about this too bad because other coaches will see this and they'll never want to say anything interesting ever again, which is obviously not, great for fans not to get some insight into their, favorite team's coach. So you want to be careful with that there a little bit, but pretty clearly Kelly put out a mission and a directive for his program, and they weren't able to achieve that. And now it sort of seems like he's excuse-making and blaming. The other thing here is, this is why we made such a big deal about Georgia holding on to Christian Miller during this spring transfer portal window, that of all the things that have happened for Georgia as of late, including bringing in a quarterback that a lot of folks think they know something about, Jaden Rashada, keeping Christian Miller was the biggest deal of all because of the kind of market that Kelly says is out there for defensive linemen. No position right now, I would say, on a consistent basis is commanding more in the way of dollars than defensive linemen because it's probably the most scarce position in a given year. There's just not enough athletic big men to go around, so therefore they have a great deal of marketability in the current NIL landscape. And Kelly is right about that if you want them, you got to pay them. But if you don't plan on paying them, the question for LSU or for Georgia or anybody else is, if you don't plan on paying defensive linemen, if you don't plan on playing that game, then what is your plan for getting elite defensive linemen? Because you are not going to be a championship contending team unless you have them. And that's a fact. So Georgia holding on to Christian Miller was a very, very big deal, because what it showed is that right now a program like Georgia, far more capable of playing the game than perhaps a team like LSU is. That is a pretty big deal, and we'll make that cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Now, on DawgNation Daily here, as promised, as we do each and every week, how about the former Georgia quarterback Jake Fromm? We call it a Kroger Fresh Take. Let's get his thoughts on everything happening around Georgia football here right now. And here on DawgNation Daily, time now for a Kroger Fresh Take is welcoming the former quarterback, Jake Fromm, Georgia quarterback, here to the program here today. Jake, we always appreciate your time. You're busy with the business of football here, but making some time to talk to us. We're always glad about that. How are you doing today?
Yeah, doing great, Brandon. Thank you for having me. Always excited to be here. And I can always find a little bit of time to make room for you in this show, because it's a great show. Well,
I'm glad to hear about that. So we've been talking a lot about Carson Beck here over the course of the last couple of days, and there's been kind of a weird conversation around him from some of like the national media people kind of outside the bubble of what we do here at DawgNation. And it seems like a general theme is, even as he moves into a year in which he could win a Heisman Trophy, or he could maybe be the #1 overall draft pick, at least a first-round pick, it still seems like there's a little bit of skepticism about him, because, as I would perceive it, he plays a part of a Georgia roster that's very deep, a lot of balance on offense, balance even between the offense and the defense. And it seems like sometimes maybe the quarterback doesn't get as much credit as he deserves, just because there are so many good players on the Georgia roster. You played, at Georgia for Kirby Smart, a little bit different kind of team than maybe this is right now, but still a similar situation. Did you feel sometimes that maybe as a quarterback you were maybe overlooked more than some quarterbacks would be in other programs, because you had the great defense, you had the great running game, and maybe sometimes quarterback kind of just got downplayed a little bit?
Yeah, first I want to start with the nature of the quarterback position. Gets probably less credit than they deserve most of the time, and they get more blame than they probably deserve most of the time. So, it's a highly magnified position. Everybody's going to have a say in the decision-making, what should have happened. If you make this throw, then yes. But, man, I think Carson's a really good football player. I think he is very talented. I think he has all the tools to obviously be great at the college football level and to even be great at the NFL level. So I can't wait to we'll see kind of throughout this season of, what will it look like without Brock Bowers, without Ladd McConkey. And, we see now after the NFL draft just how important and really good these football players were, and the value that NFL head coaches and scouts and GMs are putting on those two particular football players. So, but that's the nature of it, and they'll find answers and they'll find guys, and it's gonna be a new offense for sure with a lot of new faces, and it'll be fun to see what Carson turns into this season.
Here's the part that I find fascinating. You were a young athlete and got attention at a very early age, and obviously throughout your high school career, because the way our state approaches high school football, you were getting attention then too. But it's a different type of deal when you're kind of being poked and prodded and analyzed as a future draft prospect, which, kind of in the immediate aftermath of this past, April's NFL draft is kind of what, Carson's getting some right now. What's it like when you go from being an athlete that gets some attention, which you did, going back to your Little League World Series days, but an athlete that gets some attention, to all of a sudden now you're getting scrutinized and you're getting evaluated for every little thing, and it's on the field, off the field, and everything else in between. And I feel like you always handled it at Georgia with a lot of class, and you didn't seem to be too bothered by it necessarily, but it's got to be weird being under the magnifying glass all the time. Carson's experiencing that now. You have experienced that throughout your career. What is that like?
Yeah, I feel like I'm in a different, weirder position than most when it kind of comes to a camera and being on the spotlight. I had the Little League World Series, had the TV show in high school, and then get thrust into a starting quarterback position my freshman year of college. For me, and if I have any advice to to younger athletes, to younger men, like just be a consistent person day in and day out. So you never have to worry if the spotlight's on me, if somebody's watching. Just be who you are and be consistent. And just making sure your actions match your words and the talk that you're talking, because you have absolutely nothing to worry about. So that's just kind of my philosophy and what I have in my head. And I wanted to make sure that I was attacking each and every single day the best and the most I could, while being a consistent human being day in and day out.
So last week I asked you a question that's sort of off topic. I'm about to do this again because of something you just said. I wasn't even thinking about the QB1 show. I'd forgotten about that, but you're absolutely right. Did you see in the aftermath of the NFL draft, it sounds like some of the NFL GMs had a little bit of a skeptical view of Spencer Rattler, and maybe he fell down draft boards a little bit because of the way that he was portrayed in that, reality style, show that he was a part of there. My take on that is I don't know Spencer Rattler personally at all, Jake, but gosh, I have a hard time wanting to hold something against a guy from like 17 years old. I feel like I want to give a little space for some of these guys to grow up. Once again, this is sort of off topic. You have every right to kind of pass on this question. But, can you believe that a lot of these NFL GMs now realize it's their money and they want to be careful about how they spend it, but the idea they're going to take a skeptical eye of a quarterback now because of something that happened in, I guess, 5-6 years ago, that seems a little crazy to me.
Yeah, and it's tough. I hate it for him that something so, minute, small, potentially affected him and how he was ranked in the draft. But you just have to understand, like, what they're looking for. They're not looking for reasons to draft you.
Yeah.
They're looking for reasons not to draft you.
Yeah.
And sometimes, man, the little things, little maybe bad things that those get magnified even more than how great your arm talent is, how great this is, and it's just the nature of the process and what it's come to be.
So one of the things we've been talking about is what Georgia might be set up to have at running back here this year. Trevor Etienne's getting a lot of love. I'd say rightly so. I think that Roderick Robinson has, kind of, by all intents and purposes, had a very impressive spring. I liked him on G-Day. It sounds like a lot of the offseason workout stuff has been going very well for him. You played at Georgia at a time in which, especially your freshman season, it's Nick Chubb, it's Sony Michel. That's like 2,500 yards between two guys. I don't expect Etienne and Robinson to do that this year. I'm not sure anybody's going to do that again anytime soon. But as a quarterback, how much more fun does it make your job when you get a chance to check into a running play that you know is going to work, or you get a chance to play action off of that, have a really good chance of hitting a receiver, open because of the attention that gets paid to running backs like that? When the running game is really working, how much more fun does that make the quarterback position?
Yeah, it takes a lot of pressure off the quarterback position for sure. It makes it fun. It makes you multi-dimensional, and play calling gives you an options as a play caller. And man, it makes you feel like the whole offense is more involved. Everybody's getting a piece of the pie. Everybody has a good taste and a good feeling from what's going on in the offense, and everybody feels like they have ownership of it. So that's never a bad problem to have. Always good, never bad. Love it when running backs are capable of carrying the load.
Another topic we've discussed some this week is what might happen for Georgia moving forward at wide receiver, where it seems like the roster this year is set up to be pretty deep there at that position, and some of that's come via the transfer portal. You got guys like Ra Thomas and maybe especially Dominic Lovett after G-Day, who were here, last year, didn't have huge years last year, maybe set up to have very big years this year. A guy like Colby Young, who I believe we've talked about before, looks like he could be in line for maybe a lot of touches this year, at least the opportunity, a lot of that kind of stuff. So it seems like Georgia has utilized the transfer portal pretty well when it comes to wide receivers. And yet also with the current recruiting class, which, believe it or not, it's the 2025 cycle now, it seems like Georgia's also kind of in the mix for some pretty impressive high school receivers too. And my question is, it seems like based on the last couple of years that maybe Georgia kind of viewed the portal as the best way to get wide receiver talent, and yet now they're sort of kind of cycling back and kind of looking at some of these guys coming out of high school too. As a quarterback yourself, what is the value of A, having a ready-made player who kind of brings experience from another program versus B, the kind of player that, okay, well, he's inexperienced now, but you may have a chance to sort of train him in your own program for a couple of years. What do you make about the decision that programs like Georgia have to make now between Do we want portal receivers that are perhaps a quick fix? Do we want the high school receivers that could be a long-term option, but there's also no guarantee they stay here forever either? These are the kinds of questions that coaches are having to think about right now.
Yeah, I can't give you a one-size-fits-all in this regard. I think each and every player and every situation is unique. One example of a transfer guy that I played with that came in, was ready, and had a direct impact on the field was Javon Wims.
Yeah.
He had a huge impact on the field in his first year, and then his second year too with me. So, and then, I think about the freshman coming in instantly having an impact on the field. I think about George Pickens. George is a special and a different cat, and he's just so dynamic in what he does. But when you can come across that kind of guy in high school and mold and blend him into your culture, man, you're really onto something. You'll have a very, very special talent.
It is our Kroger Fresh Take with Jake Fromm here on the program today. And by the way, Kroger wants to remind you that this upcoming Sunday, that's Mother's Day, folks. Don't forget that. You got to make sure you take care of the mom in your life. If you'll check out the website, Kroger.com/Mother's Day, you can find out all the information you need about the greeting cards that you want to give out, or the special brunch meal you want to serve. You want the mimosas, all that kind of stuff to kind of make that a great experience. Our friends at Kroger can help you out with that. You can stop by and shop in store for that. You can check out Kroger.com/Mother's Day to begin that shopping experience online and get the great meal or the great gift, the flowers, all of that right there at your local Kroger, Kroger.com/Mother's Day for more on that. All right, Jake, last thing for you. Another topic we've spent some time discussing here is the nature of the Georgia schedule this year, where if you look at like the odds of winning the national championship, I want to say Georgia plays, I think it's 5 of the top 15, most likely national champions during the regular season. And the point that I made about that is that if you're playing that kind of schedule, the Clemsons, the Alabamas, the Texases, even Ole Miss, who's, kind of going to be a preseason top 10 team in all likelihood, that the concern I would have as a Georgia fan is, hey, those games do take a lot out of you. And that when you play a game like that, you expend a lot of energy. That may be less energy you have for the game after that, or the game 2 weeks later. And then eventually that sort of catches up for you. And that if you're, we haven't seen Georgia lose a regular season game in quite some time. But given the nature of the schedule here this year, that might be a little bit difficult to do. You played in a very rigorous SEC schedule. You also played big non-conference games against the likes of Notre Dame. So you know what tough schedules are like. How much do those tough games take out of your team the following week or 2 weeks later? And that's maybe less true for quarterback, but for the guys battling in the trenches or something like that. How much does a tough schedule make every game on the schedule potentially more difficult?
Yeah, to me, the mindset is if I want to be the best, I have to beat the best.
Sure.
And, you play in the SEC, you know what you're signing up for. It's not going to be easy. It's going to be tough. And each and every single week is a dogfight. And it may not maybe look like it on paper, but out there on the field, even let's just, air quotes the lower SEC teams
Sure.
that you go and you play. You're still out there dog fighting. They have dudes, they have players as well, and it's a very, very tough thing to do, to go week in and week out. And then you sprinkle on that the SEC has some really good teams and some really good talent this year. So the way I look at it, it's just part of it. It's just the gauntlet that you have to run through, and to be the best, you have to beat the best.
I know you love the sport. Have you gotten used to the idea of Texas and Oklahoma being SEC teams? Does that seem normal to you yet?
It's different. I'm still getting used to it, still wrapping my brain around it, and we'll see when the matchups happen more often, if it becomes easier.
Jake, it's always a pleasure to speak to you. I know it's a busy time for you as you're getting ready for the upcoming NFL training camp season and things like that. So we appreciate your time. Thanks for being here, and we'll look forward to also getting a chance to speak to you soon as a part of a Kroger Fresh Take here on DawgNation Daily.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Brandon.
Great stuff there from Jake Fromm. And that said, we'll go ahead and wrap up today's program. Always fun to have the former Georgia quarterback on the show. Also fun to do some golden shoes for you there as well. And we'll give you this one. Yesterday, our golden shoe was very high-minded, almost statesman-like when we celebrate our armed services, and a great member of our audience who brought us some really cool stuff to kind of show off, and we celebrate his service to our country. Today, we were going to get back to just kind of making fun and mocking the lousy stinking Gators, and I believe we have a little bit of a glitch with our golden shoe for today, so I'll wait and show that to you tomorrow. But just know this. It's sort of back on par for what we kind of typically do, which is making fun of Florida. So we'll do some more of that in the time to come. And speaking of those lousy, stinking Gators, how about a Gator hater updater? It's been a long time since Florida's beaten Georgia. And we think the way these two teams are set up for this year are going to be a long time again there as well. In fact, more than 1,200 days, I believe it's been, since Florida's beaten Georgia. So that's good news. And we hope you have a great day, and we'll see you back here tomorrow on DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews cooldown. Sometimes the system kind of locks up on you there a little bit. Maybe that's what happened there on that. But by now, you know, the number keeps going up. It's more of a ceremonial thing at this point anyway. But what is not ceremonial, what is official, is talking to you and getting your comments and seeing what's on your mind here. So we're going to get ready to do all of that as a part of an R.S. Andrews cooldown. And I would say a slightly longer version of the cooldown than what was a truncated version yesterday, just because of having to do some stuff. Great lunch with Dari Pero, by the way. Found Dari in great spirits, always good. He's got some fun stuff coming up this summer. Dari's a great guy. We had a good time talking to him, so that was a lot of fun. Now, let's talk to you. Paul Moon says, let's see if BA makes it a longer cool down today. Well, we do have plans on doing just that. Taylor Russell says, who am I meeting for lunch today? No meetings for me today for lunch. It does seem like, and I think I've told you this before, mostly I keep the show about Georgia football. Don't talk a ton about myself, but some of y'all are in the same situation of life I am. Here's the one thing they don't tell you, is that for a parent of like school-age kids, May is as busy as Christmas, and they never prepare you for that. They just don't. But it is just one thing right after the other, and probably a lot of this kind of stuff, I mean, my wife would be like, how is this impacting your life? She's the one that's, probably running around, far more often than I am. But it just sort of seems like it is just one thing after another. And what always ends up happening is, and some of y'all definitely know this, it's like, it rains in Georgia in the spring, and so you get these rainouts in baseball, and then when you get to the end of the season, well, now you're essentially playing like a major league schedule of like a game every night, to try to get the season in on time. And, you got rules against pitching guys on back-to-back nights. And all of a sudden now you're like managing this pitching staff on top of everything else you're doing. It's just kind of funny how, life gets very busy. Jay Shipes, that is not what we did yesterday. Shame on you, Jay. Shame on you. Paul Moon says, I only know Texas got Bond because I was hoping we'd get him. He's part of the old Buford thinking pre-KJ. Yeah, maybe that's the case. Frank Patterson also pointed out that Texas lost some stuff, starting tight end, running back, wide receivers. That is indeed the case. Their win total projection is 10.5. I don't have a problem with that projection, and I'm not like angry about it, but the idea that the CBS writers like, couldn't decide, am I going to put Georgia number 1 or Texas number 1 in SEC power rankings? That feels like slightly disrespectful to Georgia. And that's not me saying that Texas couldn't win the SEC this year. Obviously, it could. But this notion of what essentially boils down to one really big win for Texas at Alabama, and that's a doozy. I'm not denying that. That's a doozy. But, 3 years' worth of pretty significant track record from Georgia feels like the laws of hot takes have to be somewhat suspended to believe that, you could put Texas over Georgia. Now, because here's what you see. And I didn't have quite time to get into this, but the sort of point behind the point on all of this is that when it comes to talking season and rankings and lists, there's no point in doing a list if you don't have something interesting about your list. There's no point in, doing that unless you got something kind of worth selling. So in that CBS list that we did a little earlier, the big thing to sell is, well, we can't put Texas ahead of Georgia because that's a hard case to make, but we'll put Ole Miss ahead of Alabama. And so, every list that comes out, and listen, I do this for a living too, right? It's like I'm not hating on anybody for, what you got to do to create the content. But every list or thing that comes out during talking season has got to have a reason for existing. Otherwise, it just goes on the trash heap with all the other ignored content. So that was the attempt there at that. But, when we feel like there's got to be a certain what is it? Like, not parliamentary procedure, but like, is it the Duchess of Queensberry? Like the Duchess of Queensberry rules? There's got to be a certain decorum to how we participate in the sort of hot take culture. And when people violate that, we're going to call them out. CNEOG says Ewers is mid, no Worthy or AD. I believe the hype train will depart early. Could be right. I would say that people close to Texas think in addition to Bond, they've got a pretty good crop of receivers here this year. But we're going to find out. We're going to find out. Kayla Meyer says, do you have a pool? I know you love to stay tan. I want one just for this insane heat during the summer. So we have a neighborhood pool. I think I would probably like having a private pool, I think. But honestly, like, if it wasn't for the pool, I wouldn't see my neighbors because we're always running around all the time. I'm not antisocial, but, you know, like the pool, the neighborhood pool is the time in which we see people who live in our neighborhood. Because sometimes when it's not that time of year, I don't know, it feels like we just don't see people very much. Or maybe we're just, maybe we're just sort of biting off more than we can chew from a schedule standpoint. So I use the neighborhood pool, and I do like to go there a lot. It's like, sort of roll the cost with your HOA into everything else, and it ends up being almost like, it's not free because you're paying for it, but it ends up being sort of like free entertainment. My kids love the pool; they always have, and so we're big about going to the pool. Y'all know I love the beach and love my things like that. I like to play golf. I go out and play baseball with my son almost every day. So I try to put sunscreen on, take care of myself, wear a hat and things like that. But I do like being outside. And one of these days I'm going to be very, very wrinkled. And I'll be doing the show probably very, very wrinkled because I do spend a lot of time in the sun. But when I do have all those wrinkles, just know this, I earned them. I earned them living life outside. Hopefully not skin cancer, but, wrinkles for sure. Killamime says, any plans for a DawgNation invasion in Oxford for this year? No, our friends at ATL Sports Strips, we've partnered together here. I know we've got plans for season opener against Clemson, a big tailgate, DawgNation invasion to Tuscaloosa, DawgNation invasion to Austin. Oxford, I'm not quite sure about. I'll be there, but I'm not quite so sure if all of DawgNation will be heading for that or not, but it would be a fun idea. Taylor Russell says, I didn't discover body lotion until my late 20s. Yeah, I think you mean sunscreen on that. For me, from the time I was born until the time I was late 20s, I don't think I spent $5 on sunscreen. I don't. And one time, and ironically enough, this was at Perfect Day Coco K years ago before it became, back when it was just Coco K. It wasn't Perfect Day Coco K. I got very sunburned because I was an idiot, and I got very sunburned. This was all on me. This is totally my error. Very sunburned. And after that, I have been sunscreen ever since then. There's some things in life it only takes one mistake to make, and after that, you kind of do things a little bit differently. But, because my thing's always been I take the sun well, and so therefore, when I was younger, I didn't think I needed sunscreen because I didn't get real bad sunburn because I don't know if I've got Cherokee in my blood or what, but I just don't, I just take the sun well. But when you're in the middle of the Caribbean and there's no shade and you're just laying right there on the beach, there's only so well anybody's going to take the sun in that situation. And I got very sunburned. Once again, this was all my error, totally my fault. And ever since then, I've been a lot more serious about sunscreen. I told you this the other day. They were making fun of me in the DawgNation cruise. I didn't know this. Apparently, this is true. Now, nothing I'm saying constitutes medical advice. First of all, you need to do your own research. But apparently, like I was getting like SPF 100, and like Kaylee and Jeff were making fun of me. Apparently, SPF 100 is not a real thing. That, according to what I was told, I did some sort of quick research on this. Apparently anything over 50 is just made up, which I didn't know. So there you go. Crow King 123 says, did the same thing. I got sunburned easily and then went to summer camp without sunscreen and got deep fried. Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to tell you what happened to me, but it's gross. Like, it is gross. Gross. DMAR42 says, my neighborhood pool's the 3 pools, an icon of the seas. If only that was the case. If only that was the case. Jonathan Aaron says, if you can't make fun of Texas, who's back anymore, which I kind of mentioned earlier, he says, can we still make fun of Tennessee fans saying this is our year? Yeah, that's still very much in style. Tennessee has not done anything to calm any of that kind of stuff down. Cindy OG says, I've been on so many cruises, they let me name Coco K, Perfect Day, Coco K. Listen, the truth is I liked Coco K back when it was just Coco K. I would say the Perfect Day Coco K is a huge upgrade, but listen, A, to give you an idea how old I am, and B, to give you an idea how long I've been doing this, I was going to Perfect Day Coco K back when it was just Coco K. It was still fun back then. It's amazing now, but it's still fun back then. Jay Shipe says he's never used sunscreen or peeled in his life. So there you go. There you go. Yeah, Doghouse Lawn Care says, I don't do sunburn, long sleeves for me while I'm out working. And you do see that. Obviously like the big bucket hats, and some of them are even like the ones that have like the extra cover around the neck. It's one thing if you're like sort of hanging out by the pool, a little sunburn, you sort of feel like you earned that. But if you're out there earning a living, you don't want to mess with that stuff. I do get that. I do get that. BA's Cardigan says, I got blisters. Listen, I got worse. I mean, I'll just tell you. When I got a sunburn as bad as I've ever gotten, I could peel sheets of skin off. Like, just sheets of skin. It was gross. Gross. I didn't have to go to, like, the doctor or anything, so I guess it wasn't that bad. But, man, I'd never seen skin come off the way that skin did. Maybe I should have gone to the doctor, but I didn't. Jonathan Aaron, very funny, saying, not only have you been going there since it was just Coco K, you've been going there since it was just K, like just a normal type deal there, yeah. I looked this up one time, what it used to be before it became Perfect Day Coco K. I think it was like a science, like it was owned by science or something like that. I looked that up one time. Randy Hall says, no mention of the potential commitment this upcoming Sunday with the wide receiver Blackshear from Savannah. Randy, we mentioned him on yesterday's show. We did a whole thing off the top of the show. I think Randy only listens when it's time for him to comment, which is totally fine. You're free to do what you want to do. But, Randy, we did a whole thing on Blackshear yesterday. We did a whole thing on that. PDT says SPF 100 is called a blanket. Yeah. But, yeah, they told me, like, SPF 100 sunscreen, not a real thing. I had no idea. Now, as I said before, when it comes to, like, skin care and cancer avoidance, you need to – a little bit like you ever watch, like, the financial shows or, like, you watch those, like, Bitcoin YouTubers. Like, none of this constitutes financial advice. None of this constitutes medical advice. This is all for entertainment purposes only. But apparently the SPF 100 is not a real thing. But, yeah, Randy – says, we were talking about the receiver. We talked about him yesterday. Randy, I'm hurt by that. Bill Russell says, down here on the First Coast, Florida fans have found, by the way, Bill, it's great to hear from you. Bill Russell says, down here on the First Coast, Florida fans have found their voice. Hilarious. Look, I obviously think Florida fans are asinine, but I do sort of allow for whoever you're a fan of, in May, June, and July, it's like the old thing about baseball spring training and hope springing eternal. I've got nothing wrong with the absolute most hopeful possible conversation involving your team. And we'll come together and we'll laugh about it and things like that. I've got no problem, though, with if you want to be kind of happy about, that for your team, I'm sort of okay with that. I'm sort of okay with it. I mean, Florida fans are dopes, but I'm sort of okay with that. DT says, sunburn horror for me was, is it VQuest? Is that how you say that? An island off Puerto Rico in the water all day, no sunscreen, but lots of alcohol, not smart. Yeah, that can be problematic because, I've already shown my limited knowledge of science, but the issue with being in the water is the water is reflective, right? And so that creates even more problems. Also, I remember shortly after I got married, that's when I started always wearing, because if you see me at the beach or if you see me at the pool, you're always going to see me in a hat. Because, if you shoot me from this angle with the camera. Looks like I got, decent amount of coverage here. But like one of those cruise videos we show kind of takes a different angle. And, oh, boy, you realize up on top, like I'm talking about, the North Pole here, not exactly full coverage. And so that's a tough situation for the sun. And Vieques, that's how you say it, DT says. So the point is like I learned very early in what I think of as my adult life, if you're going to go out, you better have that hat on because you do not want to get the top of your head sunburned. That hurts. And when you don't have as much hair here as you do here, that is problematic. Well, let's see what else. Randy Hall says, sorry he missed. I work at the same time. Randy, I'm just giving you a hard time. I appreciate that. I appreciate you being here when you can. Let's see what else. PDT says, as bad as it seems now and busy as you are, breathe every second that you can and appreciate it because one day you'll miss it. I totally get that. And I really do. My wife and I talk about this all the time where it's like, we can't even really keep up with everything that's going on, but yet we wouldn't want to be anywhere else but there. Life is a very funny thing in that if you would have told me when I was younger what my life is like now, I would have said then, well, that's exactly why I maybe don't want kids or don't want all that kind of stuff, because that just seems like a very big interruption of the sort of life of leisure that I once dreamed of living. But what you don't realize, at least I didn't realize when I was younger, is the fact that I would rather be doing this than anything else, lounging and relaxing and, like I think I mentioned this the other day, like, watching the NBA, NHL playoffs, or even getting to follow the Braves as closely. Now, they're not on TV for me anymore, unfortunately, but when they were, even seeing like every pitch of a Braves game, those are things I just don't do anymore. Hopefully one day I'll get a chance to do again, but don't always get to do that now. And yet I am blissfully happy in the life that I get to live. And it's not what I would have ever predicted when I was younger, but it is exactly the way that it is. Let's see what's on Facebook here for a moment. And then we're going to get ready to wrap it up. We'll do Facebook and then one more trip around the comment sections is what I mean. I feel like we give you kind of a full boat here after a little bit shorter version of the comments yesterday. On Facebook, just for a moment. Let's see what else. Bill Sanders says, BA, a man of leisure. Not these days, it doesn't seem like. But still really good. Zachary Ringel and Jacob O'Neill talking about Randy getting blasted. Now, listen, I'm just giving Randy a hard time. Al Chandler says, don't let BA go to Gilligan's Island. He won't get back for about 50 years. It's funny that you say that way because I told you we had Jonathan in here the other day who's, in the Navy, and like navigation fascinates me. I'm talking about actual, I don't mean like a navigation system that's on your phone. Those things annoy me to death. But like actual navigation, I find to be fascinating. This idea that you can be in the ocean and choose to go somewhere and then you get there. Like, that's amazing, right? I mean, and that science, for the most part, has been with us for a long time. But I still am fascinated by that. That just seems crazy to me. And so I was talking to Jonathan about, how much about navigation, because his job is a little bit different. How much navigation do you really have to learn? And apparently you have to learn a good bit, as you would expect in the Navy. But, yeah, I mean, the fact that, cruise ships know how to go to the Bahamas or know how to that's just kind of cool, because when you're in the ocean, obviously you look around, you can't tell north from south, and yet somehow they figure it all out. Chad Williams, very funny. Let's see what else. Matthew Deal says, I've taken my share of beatings by the sun at early September Georgia games. That also brings up this for me, Matthew, there as well. I wonder, and perhaps there is, how many stadiums, though, in college football do you think the experience of sitting in the stadium is so different depending on where you're sitting? North side compared to the south side. Obviously, early season, if you're in what I guess is the north side, like you are baking. You are roasting in the sun. But later in the year, have you ever had this experience before? I swear, because sometimes during a game, I'll go visit, various people, and somebody's on this side of the stadium, somebody's on this side of the stadium. And if you go to a November game, the south side of the stadium, they're bundled up. They got blankets, things like that. But if it's a day game on the north side, it can be incredibly pleasant because now they're in the sun, and that's what you want to be when it's, 50 whatever degrees, 60, degrees. But in the shade, oftentimes it's much, much colder than that. To me, it's almost like, depending on where you're sitting, north side, south side, for the extreme heat at the beginning of the year and the kind of pleasant temperatures in the later part of the year, it's literally almost like two different stadiums, and I find that to be really fascinating. Let's see what else. How about Chris Slim White says he thinks that Vanderbilt is going to be bowl eligible this year. That's a bold prediction. That is a bold prediction. DT, yeah. Listen, I'm going to claim a sort of an expiration on statute of limitations for certain things from my past, perhaps. All right, back here on YouTube for a moment. Lance D says, who makes bowl eligibility first, Vanderbilt or Colorado? Yeah, the Colorado thing for this year is really, I would say, pretty strange because I really think that Shedeur is a really good quarterback. I know Shedeur's got is it a single or it's an album or whatever that's coming out? It's dropping. He's got a new single that's dropping, I believe I'm supposed to say. I don't know. I sound like 1,000 years old when I say this. I don't really want my quarterback doing an album ahead of what's supposed to be a pivotal season for him. I just don't really want that. And I know it makes me sound like I'm just, ancient, but I just kind of don't want that. I just sort of don't. And I think that Shedeur's a good player. I think the situation at Colorado seems pretty weird. Johnny Surfdog says after Deion's sons graduate, he's going to quit. I don't know that Deion wants to coach after Shedeur and Shiloh leave. I really don't. My hot take prediction of the day was he's going to go work on ESPN Game Day. He will have, achieved something. He got some wins, certainly generated some attention, and he's already a great media figure. That maybe that's just what he wants to be, and that maybe Game Day is Herb Street and Saban and Deion. I don't love Desmond, but if you gave me that trio of Herb Street sort of playing it straight, Saban the ex-coach, Deion also an ex-coach, but also just sort of a, kind of a Charles Barkley style figure. That to me would be a trio that could rival what Kenny and Shaq and Charles do on the TNT stuff. Because the two really good, Game Day is always on the road, so it's not quite a studio show, but like the pregame show, or the we'll call them studio shows because that's just a broad category. It's inside the NBA and it's College Game Day. Those are the two shows that feel like they really mean something. Now, I'd say that Game Day sort of lost some of its luster a little bit. But if Deion doesn't want to coach and he joined that show, which is totally something I'm making up, I think that'd be a good way to kind of get some juice back into that show a little bit. Let us see what else. Senio G says that Shedeur is a good quarterback, but his surroundings will always shed a dimming light on him. Yeah. And the other thing I'd say on that, too, is that it seems like there was a falling out between Deion and Sean Lewis, who's now the head coach at San Diego State, who was the offensive coordinator. Lewis, y'all remember, was the offensive coordinator for Kent State when they came here. Was that 2021 or 2022? I can't remember. Maybe it's 2021. I honestly can't. Maybe it's I can't remember. He was good. No, actually, I'm sorry. He was the head coach at Kent State, but they were basically running his offense. He was the head coach at Kent State. Sharp offensive mind. He's head coach again now to pretty good place in San Diego State. But he got demoted last year as offensive coordinator. I think it's Pat Shurmur, kind of a veteran name from the NFL, who's the play caller there now. I have a hard time imagining that Shurmur is going to be an upgrade over Sean Lewis. So that's going to be worth, watching. KC says, I'm not seeing Shedeur as a franchise quarterback in the NFL. I think a lot of that's going to be determined by what happens this season. MG says that Shedeur only looks good because he throws the ball 100 times a game. Like, I do get the idea that Colorado was overhyped. I do get that. But even if that's true, I think Shedeur is a pretty interesting player. I do. And, at one point in time, Deion would have told you that Shedeur was not getting enough of a look as a recruit. I think that's been proven to be true. I do. And I am someone who also thinks that Colorado is a little bit overhyped. But, Deion says that Shedeur is going to go in the top 5 of the draft. I don't know if I believe that. But I do believe that Shedeur is proving to be a better player than some folks thought he would be. I do think that's true. All right, we're going to wrap it up for now. Y'all check out RS Andrews online, rsandrews.com, for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs. Great lunch with Dari Pero yesterday. They're doing great work. Dari was actually talking to me about my air conditioning unit yesterday. That's just what he does. Just a kind, generous guy who's looking to make sure everybody stays cool and comfortable all spring and summer long. So find them online, rsandrews.com. That is rsandrews.com. If your water heater goes out, they can replace that for you there as well. Story after story, they've been delivering smiles. They want to do that for you. So find them online, rsandrews.com. Y'all have a great day. Back here tomorrow, DawgNation Daily, presented by Breda Pest Management. We'll look forward to talking to you.